Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg. Today I'm doing my reading evolution tag created by Spread the Book Joy, and I was tagged by MJ at Reading This Life. This tag has 5 prompts. Prompt number 1. What you read. How has your taste in books evolved? I started reading when I was in 6th grade, and I picked up a volume of short stories by H.P. Lovecraft. The people who remember the old Ballantine head covers where you had a head being split open, it was held together by a band with a lock on it, and bats are creeping out of the head. And that's what I started reading. And I absolutely loved those short stories. I was a little too young to fully comprehend everything that was going on in Lovecraft, story-wise and style-wise. I was just a little bit behind, but I caught up quickly. From there, I moved on to science fiction, fantasy, and other horror. And I pretty much stuck with those genres up until I entered university, when I started to have to read a little more literature. I did have to read some literature in high school, of course, but that was always on the side, and I was always sort of like skimping on the literature and trying to read more of the books I wanted to read. But once I got to university, I sort of dug in deep into literature. And after that, my reading of the genres sort of took a back seat. I started reading that less and less. And then after I got out of university, I kept with the literature. I did occasionally peek into like horror novels like Stephen King or some of the old pulpy paperbacks. I remember trying to read The Rats by James Herbert around that time for the first time. But really, it was like a dirty little secret that I wasn't telling people. And now, over time, I've expanded. I now read literature, I read the genre fiction, and I read nonfiction. I read poetry, and I read some plays every now and then. So I have a wide range of what I read. And I consider that an evolution because like you said, it changes over time. You could look at the books that I read in the early 90s and probably see that I was a different person than I am today. Prompt number 2, how you read. Has the format of your reading changed much? Yes. Around 1997, I discovered audiobooks. What was happening is I was an employee at a bookstore. It was Crown Books, and I was friends with the manager, and the manager was promoted to be a book buyer at the corporate office. But he still lived in the area. And then one day he called me and said, "Can you help me move over the weekend?" Because he had a whole lot of books. And he offered me a box of free books if I helped him move. And now what happens when you're a buyer at the corporate office, you get just lots of reading copies and display copies and whatnot. And what you could do at the bookstore is take in that book, which was brand new, go to the counter and say, "I received this as a gift. I would like to exchange it for something else." And if that book cost $10, they would give you $10 in credit on the spot to go buy something else. Now, usually when you had a whole big box of books like that, it could be like $40, $50, maybe even $60 worth of books. So I was psyched. I volunteered to help. Now, the one thing is, one of the books he gave me was an unabridged audio cassette version of 1984 by George Orwell, read by Timothy West. And I went to the bookstore to exchange it. Now, one of their rules is that if you have a gift to exchange, it has to be a book that they carry in the store. And those cassettes were not something that was sold by Crown Books. so they rejected those. And I was thinking about taking them to another used bookstore and just turning them for credit, getting a few pennies on the dollar. But for whatever reason, I decided to open that and listen to it. And my life has never been the same since, because I have never given up listening to audiobooks since 1997. And it has vastly increased my ability to read more books, because all of a sudden, I could be going to work. And instead of listening to music for an hour in the commute, I can listen to a book. And my hour return, I can continue listening to that book. So that was such an immense discovery for me, audiobooks. In 2002, I've done a whole video on this, so I won't go into too much detail. I really got into ebooks. And ebooks, again, was a sea change because it opened my ability to read more books and more kinds of books. And I have never looked back on ebooks since then. So I have three primary sources of reading. I have my paper books, I have my audiobooks, and I have my digital books. All three are absolutely essential. Prompt number 3, how much you read. Do you read more, less than previously? When do you read? How often? When do you read? Has how often you read changed? Actually, it has changed recently. I retired last year, and that's given me a lot more time to read. But also, I read not that much more compared to what I was reading when I had a day job. And most of that is due to the farting around syndrome. I get up and say, I have all day to read. I can fart around doing this or that for a short amount of time and then start reading. And then all of a sudden you've discovered that you've been farting around and it's 3 p.m. And most of your day that you could have devoted to reading has just disappeared into thin air, into nothingness. So in that case, even though I work less, I don't necessarily read that much more. And for when I read, I have a pretty set schedule. When I get up, I feed the cats, do their litter boxes, and then I go for a walk, usually half hour to an hour, sometimes a little more, and I listen to my audiobooks to get my audiobooks in. And then when I get back, that's when the farting around really starts. I should learn to stop farting around, but that's going to be a little bit more difficult. And then usually in the afternoon, I start reading in earnest and read in earnest through the night until I get too tired. And then after I get too tired, I fart around some more, have some adult beverages, and go to bed. Prompt number 4. How has Booktube changed you as a reader? It has brought me into buddy reads and conversations with other readers. It used to be that I never talked to other readers, mostly because my wife likes big houses, and basically at our income, to buy a big house, you have to buy it in the far suburbs. And what that means is there's not a lot of bookish things to do in the far suburbs. Occasionally, you'll be near a Barnes & Noble, but those are, I'm sorry, rather lame as bookstores go. They cater to the mommies and the young adults, but an adult male reader like me who has a fairly esoteric taste for literature or old pulpy crime books, Barnes & Noble just doesn't cut the mustard. So Booktube has opened me up to conversations with people. It has also opened me up to different kinds of books to read. While I have read a few Westerns in my life, this year I started reading Westerns in earnest for June on the Range. And who would have thought that I could enjoy a Western? But Westerns are enjoyable. And that is something Booktube brought to my life. and other genres. Who knows what's waiting for me out there? We shall see. Prompt number 5, tag some people. I hope none of you have been tagged before. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's just an invitation. But Anna Novella, Big Hard Books and Classics, Book Time with Elvis, Book Time with Ryan, and Reverend Reads. Well, thank you for watching, and keep on reading.